While I lay helpless in that hospital bed, I heard my daughter-in-law tell the nurse something that made my blood run cold. "You don't need to update her. We handle the important things." Little did she know, within 24 hours I'd sign one document that would change everything. Hello, everyone. I'm Eleanor, and I want to share a story that still gives me chills when I think about it. You know, when my son Michael married Jessica 8 years ago, I thought I was gaining a daughter. She was charming, always quick with a compliment, and seemed genuinely interested in our family traditions. Michael was absolutely smitten, and I'll admit I was too. I'm 72 years old, and after my husband Robert passed away 5 years ago, I found myself increasingly relying on Michael and Jessica for help with various things. It started small. Jessica offering to help me set up online banking because it's so much more convenient, Eleanor. Then it was helping me organize my insurance papers, my investment accounts, even updating my phone contacts because we want to make sure everything's streamlined for you. I appreciated the help. I really did. Technology isn't exactly my strong suit, and having someone patient enough to walk me through these things felt like a blessing. Jessica would sit with me for hours, explaining how everything worked, taking notes, and making sure I was comfortable with each change. "Don't worry about remembering all these passwords, Eleanor," she'd say with that sweet smile of hers. "We'll keep everything organized for you. That's what family is for." Over the years, Jessica gradually became the person I called when I had questions about my accounts, when I needed to update information, or when something seemed off with my statements. She always had an answer, always seemed to have everything under control. Michael would joke that Jessica was like my personal financial advisor, and honestly, it felt that way. Then came that terrible morning in March. I was getting ready for church when I suddenly felt dizzy and short of breath. The chest pain hit me like a freight train, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the cardiac unit at St. Mary's Hospital. The doctors explained that I'd had a mild heart attack. Nothing immediately life-threatening, they assured me, but I'd need to stay for observation and some additional tests. I was scared, I'll admit it. Being alone in that hospital bed with all those machines beeping around me made me feel more vulnerable than I had since Robert died. Michael and Jessica arrived within hours. Michael looked genuinely worried, holding my hand and asking the doctors a dozen questions about my condition and what the treatment plan would look like. Jessica was there too, of course, but she seemed more interested in talking to the nursing staff about logistics. "Who should we put down as the primary emergency contact?" she asked the admission nurse. "And who will be receiving updates about her condition?" I thought it was thoughtful of her to handle those details while Michael focused on the medical aspects. I was grateful to have them both there, taking care of things I couldn't manage from my hospital bed. The first 2 days passed in a blur of tests, medications, and visits from various specialists. Michael would stop by every morning before work and every evening after. Jessica came by most afternoons, always bringing me things I might need. Magazines, a more comfortable pillow, my favorite tea bags for when I was cleared to drink them. But on the third day, something happened that changed everything. I had been dozing on and off throughout the afternoon. The medication they had me on made me drowsy, and I'd been drifting in and out of sleep. I heard voices in the hallway outside my room, but they seemed far away and muffled. Then I heard Jessica's voice, clearer now, talking to someone just outside my door. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Patterson's nurse?" Jessica asked. "Yes, I'm Sarah. I'll be taking care of her this shift. Are you family?" "I'm her daughter-in-law. Listen, I need to tell you something important about her care. She gets confused easily, especially with all this medication, and it upsets her when she gets too much medical information. My husband and I have been managing all her important affairs for years now." My eyes snapped open. Confused? I wasn't confused about anything. My mind was as sharp as it had ever been, heart attack or no heart attack. "You don't need to update her on test results or changes to her treatment plan," Jessica continued, her voice taking on that authoritative tone I was beginning to recognize. "We handle the important things. It's better if all communication goes through us first. She trusts us to filter what she needs to know. Honestly, too much medical jargon just makes her anxious and paranoid. I felt like I'd been slapped. Filter what I needed to know about my own medical care? Paranoid? I had been managing my own medical decisions for over 70 years. I had advocated for my late husband through his cancer treatment, making complex decisions about treatments and care facilities. The idea that I suddenly couldn't handle information about my own condition was not just insulting. It was a complete fabrication. But what terrified me most was how confident Jessica sounded, how natural this conversation seemed to her. This wasn't the first time she'd had this discussion with a medical professional. She spoke like someone who had practiced this script, refined it, perfected it. "I understand you want to protect her," the nurse replied. "But Mrs. Patterson seems quite alert and capable of understanding her medical situation. Hospital policy requires us to communicate directly with patients about their care unless they've specifically requested otherwise." "Well, she has. Requested otherwise," Jessica said firmly. "She's told us many times that dealing with medical details stresses her out. We're just trying to protect her mental health during recovery." That was a complete lie. I had never said anything like that to anyone. I lay there in shock, pretending to be asleep, as I heard Jessica's footsteps moving away down the hall. My mind was racing. Why would she lie to the nursing staff? Why would she want to control what medical information I received? And then a more disturbing thought crept in. If Jessica was lying about this, what else might she be lying about? That evening, when Michael came to visit, I decided to test something. "Honey," I said, "I've been thinking about my investment portfolio. With this health scare, maybe it's time to review my beneficiaries and make sure everything is in order. Could you help me contact my financial advisor tomorrow?" Michael looked confused. "Mom, Jessica's been handling all that stuff for you, remember? She can take care of updating anything that needs to be updated." "I know she's been helping, but I'd like to speak with my advisor directly this time. I want to understand exactly what I have and where everything stands." "But Mom, you always say that financial stuff gives you a headache. Jessica's got everything organized perfectly. Why complicate things?" "When did I say financial stuff gives me a headache?" I asked. Michael paused, looking genuinely puzzled. "Jessica mentioned that you get overwhelmed when there's too much detail about investments and accounts. That's why she simplified everything for you." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Michael, I've never said that. I've always been interested in understanding my finances." "But," Michael started, then stopped. I could see the wheels turning in his head. "Are you sure, Mom? Jessica said you specifically asked her to handle those conversations because they stressed you out." "I'm very sure, sweetheart. I think there may be some misunderstanding here." Michael left that night looking troubled, and I spent the entire night lying awake, thinking about every interaction I'd had with Jessica over the past few years. The more I thought about it, the more things didn't add up. Why had Jessica been so insistent on being present whenever I spoke with my bank or investment firm? Why did she always have explanations ready when I asked about changes to my accounts? And why had I started feeling like I understood my own finances less and less when I'd been managing them perfectly fine for decades? The next morning, I asked my nurse Sarah if I could use the phone to make a private call. "Of course, Mrs. Patterson. Would you like me to close the door for privacy?" "Yes, please." I called my financial advisor, David Morrison, who had been managing my accounts for over 15 years. "Eleanor, how are you feeling?" Jessica called and told us about your hospitalization. She said you were having some memory issues related to your medication. "Memory issues?" "David, my memory is fine. What exactly did Jessica tell you?" There was a pause. "She said that you'd been getting confused about your account details and that it was causing you stress. She asked us to direct all communications through her so you could focus on your recovery without worrying about financial matters." "David, I need to know exactly what changes have been made to my accounts over the past year." "Well, Jessica has power of attorney, so she's been authorized to make decisions on your behalf. She's moved several of your investments around, set up some new automatic transfers, and she's been receiving all your statements and confirmations. What do you mean she has power of attorney? When did I sign that? Another pause. Longer this time. Eleanor, you signed the power of attorney documents about 18 months ago. Jessica brought them in, notarized and everything. You don't remember signing them? I felt dizzy, but not from my heart condition. I didn't remember signing any power of attorney. I would never have given anyone complete control over my finances without discussing it thoroughly, not even family. David, I need to see copies of everything that's been signed. Can you email them to me? Of course, but I should mention, Jessica requested that we send all documentation to her email address since she's handling your affairs now. David, please listen to me carefully. I want all documentation sent to my personal email address, and I want to schedule an appointment to review my accounts as soon as I'm released from the hospital. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from anger. I was starting to see a picture I didn't like at all. I spent the rest of that day making phone calls. My bank, my insurance company, even my lawyer. The story was the same everywhere. Jessica had power of attorney. Jessica had been receiving all communications. Jessica had been making decisions on my behalf because I was having difficulty managing complex financial matters. Each conversation was more disturbing than the last. At my bank, they told me Jessica had explained that I was experiencing early cognitive decline and that family members were concerned about my decision-making capacity. At my insurance company, she'd told them I was overwhelmed by paperwork and prone to making impulsive financial decisions that worried the family. My lawyer's office was perhaps the most shocking. Jessica had apparently called them 6 months ago, asking about the process for having someone declared incompetent due to age-related mental decline. She'd asked detailed questions about guardianship procedures and what medical documentation would be required. She said it was just preliminary research, my lawyer's assistant explained. She wanted to be prepared in case your condition deteriorated. She seemed very concerned about your welfare. By the time I hung up from that call, my hands were shaking with rage. Jessica hadn't just been stealing my money and my autonomy. She'd been systematically laying groundwork to have me declared incompetent. Every helpful gesture, every time she'd insisted on handling something so I wouldn't worry about it, had been part of a calculated plan to strip away my independence entirely. I thought about all those afternoons when she'd sat with me, supposedly helping me understand my accounts, explaining changes that the bank had recommended. I realized now that she'd probably been deliberately confusing me, making my own finances seem more complicated than they actually were, so that I'd become more dependent on her explanations. If you're as shocked as I was discovering this betrayal, please hit that subscribe button because this story gets even more unbelievable. By evening, I had a plan, but I needed help from someone I could trust, someone who wouldn't have been influenced by Jessica's lies. I called my nephew Tom, Robert's sister's boy. Tom was a lawyer in the next state, and we'd always maintained a good relationship even though we didn't see each other often. Most importantly, he'd had minimal contact with Jessica over the years. Aunt Eleanor, I heard about your heart attack. How are you feeling? Tom, I'm fine physically, but I need your help with something serious. I can't discuss it over the phone, but can you drive up here tomorrow? It's important. Of course. I'll leave first thing in the morning. That night, I barely slept. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, I wondered if it was Jessica coming to check on me. Every time a nurse came in to check my vitals, I found myself wondering what Jessica might have told them about my mental state. Tom arrived the next morning with coffee and pastries, but his expression turned serious as I explained what I'd discovered. Aunt Eleanor, this sounds like elder abuse, potentially financial fraud. We need to document everything. That's exactly what I was thinking. Tom, I need to know what legal options I have. Tom pulled out his laptop and started taking notes as I walked him through every detail I could remember. The gradual way Jessica had taken over different aspects of my life, the conversations I'd overheard, the power of attorney I'd supposedly signed but didn't remember. First thing we need to do is get copies of all these documents Jessica supposedly had you sign. If they're forged, that's a serious crime. Second, we need to revoke any legitimate power of attorney immediately and establish new safeguards for your accounts. What about Jessica? What about Michael? This is going to tear the family apart. Tom looked at me seriously. Aunt Eleanor, if what you're telling me is true, Jessica has already torn the family apart. She's stolen your autonomy and possibly your money. Michael needs to know the truth, even if it's painful. We spent the next 2 hours planning. Tom would request all the documentation from my various financial institutions. He'd also help me prepare new power of attorney documents that would revoke any existing ones. But most importantly, he'd help me figure out exactly what Jessica had been doing with my money. There's one more thing, I told Tom. I want to know exactly what Jessica's been telling people about my mental capacity. If she's been spreading lies about me being confused or incompetent, I want documentation of that too. When Tom left that afternoon, I felt more empowered than I had in years. For the first time since I'd overheard that conversation in the hallway, I felt like I was taking back control of my life. The next day, my doctor cleared me for discharge. Michael and Jessica came to pick me up, and I watched Jessica's behavior with new eyes. The way she immediately started talking to the nurse about my discharge instructions, as if I wasn't sitting right there. The way she took the prescription information and put it in her purse instead of handing it to me. The way she answered questions the nurse had directed at me. "I'll make sure she takes her medications on schedule," Jessica told the nurse. "She sometimes forgets things when she's stressed." I bit my tongue. I had never forgotten to take medication in my life. During the drive home, Jessica sat in the passenger seat giving me a detailed explanation of what my recovery process would look like. "I've already arranged for a meal delivery service," she said, "and I'll be stopping by twice a day to check on you and make sure you're taking your pills correctly. Michael can't get away from work that much, so it'll mostly be me managing your care." Managing my care? Those words hit me like a slap. "That's very thoughtful," I said carefully, "but I think I can manage my own medication schedule." "Oh, Eleanor, don't be silly. After everything you've been through, the last thing you need is the stress of trying to keep track of all these new prescriptions. Besides, the doctor said it's important to have family support during recovery." The doctor had said no such thing. In fact, he'd specifically told me that staying active and independent would be important for my recovery. Jessica continued talking, and I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before, the way she spoke about my life as if it belonged to her. "We'll need to adjust your exercise routine," she said. "We should probably cancel your book club meetings for the next few weeks, and I think it's time we seriously considered getting you one of those medical alert devices. You know, in case you fall or get confused and can't remember how to call for help." Confused. There was that word again. Jessica had been planting the seed of my supposed mental decline everywhere she went, with everyone she spoke to. I wondered how long she'd been doing this. How many people in my life now believed I was losing my mental faculties because of her carefully crafted lies. "I've also been thinking," Jessica continued, "that we should probably move your important documents to our house for safekeeping. You know, just in case something happens and you need us to handle things quickly." The audacity of it took my breath away. She wasn't even trying to be subtle anymore. She was literally sitting next to me, talking about taking possession of my legal documents as if I were already incapacitated. When we reached my house, I noticed Jessica automatically headed toward my home office. "I'll just check if any important mail came while you were in the hospital," she said. "Actually, Jessica, I'd prefer to go through my own mail." She paused, looking surprised. "But Eleanor, you always ask me to handle your correspondence. Remember how you said sorting through bills and statements makes you anxious? I don't remember saying that, and I'd like to handle my own mail from now on." For just a moment, I saw something flash across Jessica's face. Annoyance? Anger? It was gone so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. Of course, she said with a tight smile. I was just trying to help. After Michael and Jessica left, I sat in my kitchen drinking tea and thinking about everything that had happened. Tom had said he'd have the document copies by the end of the week, but I already knew what we'd find. Jessica had been systematically taking control of my life, and she'd been doing it so gradually that even Michael hadn't noticed what was happening. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Jessica's behavior hadn't changed recently. It had been building for years. She'd just gotten so comfortable with her level of control that she'd stopped being careful about hiding it. 2 days later, Tom called with news that confirmed my worst fears. Aunt Eleanor, we have a problem. I've been going through all the documents from your financial institutions. The power of attorney signatures don't match your handwriting at all. It looks like Jessica forged your signature on multiple documents. How much money are we talking about, Tom? Based on what I can see so far, she's moved about $80,000 from your savings into accounts that she has sole access to. She's also changed the beneficiaries on your life insurance policies and your retirement accounts. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. $80,000. And she'd changed my beneficiaries, too. Tom, that money, that was what Robert and I saved for emergencies, for my long-term care if I ever needed it. We worked 43 years to build that security. I know, Aunt Eleanor, but there's more. Tom's voice was grim. I called your doctor's office to ask about the medical information sharing. They have detailed notes from Jessica about your supposed cognitive decline, your memory issues, and your inability to handle complex information. She's been building a paper trail to support the idea that you're incompetent. What kind of notes? She told them you've been repeating yourself, forgetting conversations, getting confused about simple tasks. She even claimed you'd gotten lost driving to the grocery store and that the family was concerned about your safety. I stared at Tom in disbelief. I've never gotten lost. I've been driving the same routes in this town for 50 years. According to their records, Jessica suggested that your family was considering moving you to assisted living because you were no longer safe to live alone. She painted a picture of someone in rapid mental decline who needed constant supervision. The full picture was becoming clear, and it was more sinister than I had imagined. Jessica hadn't just been stealing my money, she'd been systematically destroying my reputation, my relationships, and my independence. She'd been preparing everyone in my life to accept that I was no longer capable of making my own decisions. Tom, what are my options? Well, we can definitely prove fraud. The forged signatures alone are enough for criminal charges. But Eleanor, I need to ask you something difficult. How do you want to handle Michael? He may have been deceived, but he's also been complicit in some of these decisions. I thought about my son, about the confused look on his face when I'd questioned what Jessica had told him about my supposed struggles with financial information. I still believed Michael had been manipulated, but I also knew he'd have to face some difficult truths about his wife. I want Michael to know everything, I said, but I want to control how and when he finds out. What about Jessica? Jessica is going to learn that underestimating a 72-year-old woman was the biggest mistake of her life. Tom and I spent the next week putting together what he called our case package. Copies of all the forged documents, evidence of the unauthorized money transfers, documentation of Jessica's lies to my medical and financial teams, and a timeline showing how she'd systematically isolated me from my own affairs. But I wasn't ready to confront Jessica yet. I wanted to understand the full scope of what she'd done, and I wanted to make sure my response would be comprehensive and decisive. The following Monday, Tom came to my house with a folder full of documents and a plan. "Here's what we're going to do," he said. "First, we're going to revoke every power of attorney that Jessica claims to have, and we're going to put new safeguards in place on all your accounts. Second, we're going to document everything she's done and prepare it for both civil and criminal proceedings. Third, we're going to make sure everyone who's been fed lies about your competence gets corrected information. And fourth," I asked. "Fourth, we're going to make sure Jessica never has the opportunity to do this to anyone else." Tom had brought several documents for me to sign. new power of attorney paperwork that gave very limited authority to Tom himself, just for emergency situations, account change forms that would restore my full control over my finances and remove Jessica's access entirely, and most importantly, a formal complaint to the State Attorney General's office documenting the fraud. As I signed each document, I felt like I was reclaiming pieces of myself that had been stolen. With every signature, every account restoration, every revoked authorization, I was systematically dismantling the prison Jessica had built around my life. "There's one more thing," Tom said. "I've been in touch with a detective who specializes in financial elder abuse. She wants to meet with you this week to discuss filing criminal charges." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Let's do it." But before we moved forward, Tom and I spent another day documenting everything we could remember about Jessica's behavior over the years. We created a timeline showing how she'd gradually inserted herself into every aspect of my life. The way she'd started by helping with small tasks, then progressively taken over more significant responsibilities. How she'd begun speaking for me in conversations with professionals, answering questions I was perfectly capable of answering myself. We documented the lies. Her claims that I was confused, forgetful, overwhelmed by financial details. We gathered evidence showing that I was still the same sharp, capable woman I'd always been. My recent medical tests showed no cognitive decline. My driving record was spotless. My bill-paying history was meticulous, right up until Jessica took over. Tom had also discovered something chilling in Jessica's internet search history, which the police had obtained with a warrant. She'd been researching signs of dementia in elderly women, how to get power of attorney for aging parents, and elder guardianship laws. Most disturbing of all, she'd visited websites about managing difficult elderly relatives and had joined online forums where adult children discussed strategies for taking control of aging parents' finances. "Aunt Eleanor," Tom said, showing me printouts of her search history. "This wasn't impulsive or opportunistic. This was a calculated plan." The detective, Maria Santos, came to my house on Thursday afternoon. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "Mrs. Patterson, what your daughter-in-law has done to you is a crime, not just the forgery and the theft, but the systematic effort to undermine your autonomy. We see this pattern frequently in elder abuse cases." Detective Santos walked me through the process of filing criminal charges. She explained that with the evidence Tom and I had gathered, they had a strong case for multiple felonies: forgery, fraud, theft, and potentially elder abuse. "What I need you to understand," Detective Santos said, "is that once we begin this process, there's no going back. Jessica will be arrested, and this will likely destroy her marriage to your son. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Michael, about how much I loved him, about how hard this would be for him. But I also thought about Jessica's voice in that hospital hallway, telling the nurse that I didn't need to be updated about my own medical care, because we handle the important things. Detective Santos, my daughter-in-law, has spent years systematically stealing my money and my autonomy while convincing everyone around me that I was becoming incompetent. She forged legal documents. She lied to medical professionals about my mental capacity. She stole $80,000 from me. If I don't hold her accountable, what message does that send about how society values elderly people? "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Patterson. Let's proceed." The next part happened faster than I expected. Detective Santos said they'd execute a warrant to search Jessica's computer and phone records by the end of the week. They'd also be reviewing her personal financial records to trace where my money had gone. "Mrs. Patterson, I recommend that you tell your son what's happening before Jessica is arrested. This is going to be shocking for him, and he'll need time to process it." I knew she was right. Michael deserved to hear this from me, not from a phone call telling him his wife had been arrested. I invited Michael to dinner on Saturday night, telling him I wanted to discuss some important family matters. I didn't mention that Tom would be there, or that we'd be presenting him with evidence of his wife's crimes. Michael arrived promptly at 6, bringing flowers and asking about my recovery. "I'm feeling much better," I told him, "but we need to talk about something serious. Tom's here too." Michael looked confused when Tom emerged from the kitchen. "Uncle Tom? I didn't know you were visiting." "Michael," I said, "please sit down. What I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear." I started from the beginning. The conversation I'd overheard at the hospital, my phone calls to my financial advisor, the discovery of the forged power of attorney documents. Tom showed Michael copies of the evidence we'd gathered, walking him through each forged signature, each unauthorized transaction, each lie Jessica had told to isolate me from my own affairs. Michael's face went through a progression of emotions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, a kind of devastated understanding. "Mom," he said quietly, "are you sure about this? Maybe there's some explanation." Tom handed him a side-by-side comparison of my real signature and the signatures on the power of attorney documents. "Michael, these aren't even close. And look at this." Tom showed him bank records detailing the money transfers. "She moved $80,000 from your mother's accounts to accounts that only she can access. That's not a misunderstanding or a mistake." Michael stared at the documents for a long time. Finally, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I believed her when she said you were having trouble managing things. I thought we were helping you." "You were manipulated too, sweetheart. Jessica is very good at what she does." "What happens now?" Michael asked. "Criminal charges will be filed on Monday," Tom said. "Jessica will likely be arrested by the end of next week." Michael put his head in his hands. 8 years of marriage. How did I not see this? "Because she didn't want you to see it," I said, "and because you trusted her the way families should be able to trust each other." That weekend, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness because I knew Michael's life was about to be turned upside down, but relief because the truth was finally coming out. On Monday morning, Tom called to tell me the warrant had been executed. "They found email correspondence between Jessica and her sister discussing your money. Apparently she's been planning this for years. They also found evidence that she's done this before, to her own grandfather." "Her own grandfather?" "He died 3 years ago. They're opening an investigation into that case, too." Detective Santos called me that afternoon. "Mrs. Patterson, we've arrested Jessica. She's been charged with elder abuse, forgery, fraud, and theft. Based on what we found on her computer, there may be additional charges." "What did you find?" "Evidence that she's been systematically planning to have you declared incompetent so she could gain complete control of your estate. She'd been researching guardianship laws and had drafts of legal documents that would have given her total authority over your life." I felt sick. Jessica hadn't just been stealing my money. She'd been planning to steal my entire life. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, interviews with prosecutors, and meetings with my financial institutions to restore proper control of my accounts. Tom helped me navigate it all, but the most difficult part was watching Michael come to terms with what his wife had done. Jessica's trial was set for 6 months later, but her lawyer advised her to accept a plea deal. She pled guilty to multiple felonies and was sentenced to 4 years in prison and full restitution of the money she'd stolen. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when I received a letter from my bank, my investment firm, and my insurance company. Each letter contained a formal apology for accepting Jessica's claims about my mental capacity without proper verification, and detailed new policies they'd implemented to protect their elderly clients from similar fraud. The money Jessica stole has been returned to my accounts. The forged power of attorney documents have been voided and destroyed. Every financial and medical institution that had been fed lies about my competence has been provided with documentation clearing my name. Michael and I are rebuilding our relationship. It's been difficult for him, discovering that the woman he loved and trusted had been systematically abusing his mother. But he's been going to therapy and we're working through it together. As for me, I'm doing better than I've done in years. I'm managing my own affairs again, making my own financial decisions, and communicating directly with all my medical and legal professionals. I've also become an advocate for other elderly people who might be experiencing similar abuse. Jessica thought she could manipulate me because of my age, that she could convince everyone I was becoming incompetent and that I'd be too weak or confused to fight back. She was wrong about all of it. Sometimes the people who underestimate us the most are the ones who end up learning the hardest lessons. And Jessica learned that taking advantage of a 72-year-old woman was the biggest mistake of her life.